Hello and welcome to the online tutorial for Thomas Hardy's The Going. Firstly, let's listen to this poem being read aloud.
Why did you give no hint that night, that quickly after the morrow's dawn, and calmly, as if indifferent quite, you would close your term here, up and be gone where I could not follow, with wing of swallow, to gain one glimpse of you ever anon? Never to bid goodbye, or lip me the softest call, or utter a wish for a word, while I saw morning harden upon the wall, unmoved, unknowing that your great going had placed that moment and altered all. Why do you make me leave the house, and think for a breath it is you I see, at the end of the alley of bending boughs, where so often at dusk you used to be? Till in darkening dankness, the yawning blankness of the perspective sickens me. You were she who abode by those red-veined rocks far west. You were the swan-necked one who rode along the beetling beany crest, and reigning nigh me would muse and eye me, while life unrolled us its very best. Why then latterly did we not speak and think of those days long dead, and ere your vanishing some renewal? We might have said, in this bright spring weather we'll visit together those places that once we visited. Well, well, all's past amend, unchangeable, it must go. I seem but a dead man held on end to sink down soon. Oh, you could not know that such swift fleeing, no soul foreseeing, not even I, would undo me so.
Perhaps the most important thing to acknowledge at the outset is that this is one of the poems that Hardy wrote following the death of his wife. There's a whole series of poems, often called the Emma poems, some of which we study for this examination, some of which we don't, where Hardy runs through his feelings of sorrow, remorse and happiness at the ending of their relationship and her death. What's crucial to remember though at all times is that during their 38 years of marriage, Hardy and Emma had a very unhappy relationship. In her diary, which Hardy found after her death, Emma goes through a series of events and circumstances in which she felt that Hardy was very cruel to her. And when Hardy found this, he felt a huge amount of remorse. The reason why this is so important is that at all times when we study these Emma poems, we must put them against a backdrop of a man who didn't articulate this level of emotion or this level of feelings during their relationship. In fact, at the very end of this poem, The Going, we could argue that the final line seems to suggest he is surprised at how upset he is that she has died. So let's have a look at this opening stanza. I think, without question, our eye is drawn straight away to the use of that word why as the first word in this poem. Why did you give no hint that night? And I think we can hear in the tone of that first line that what Hardy is most concerned with is the idea that his wife has gone without telling him. It is the question, the interrogative, why did you give no hint? And I think we can say there is certainly a trace of bitterness in that tone, that Hardy is more concerned with how he feels about the fact that the wife has gone, rather than acknowledging that she has died. Why did you give no hint? He's blaming her for going and not telling him. And then, as we look down to that third line, and calmly as if indifferent quite, that for me seems to highlight what Hardy is most concerned with, that Emma has gone and hasn't taken his feelings into account. She has been indifferent to him. And that notion that again he is the most significant person in this situation rather than the woman that's died lends a tone to this poem that makes Hardy quite hard to like, I think. Again, when we look at the fourth line, we can note that actually this isn't a death that's being articulated, it's a leaving, it's a going. You would close your term here. It's like she's a shop that's closed down and has moved somewhere else, rather than a woman that has died. However, right towards the end of this first stanza, I think the tone improves somewhat. that the sorrow that Hardy feels is that he cannot follow, even if he could fly, even if he had wings of a swallow, he would not be able to follow her and see her ever again. So quite a difficult stanza there to get your head round, that we have at the first sight something that we feel a degree of unhappiness with, his bitterness, his self-centered egotism, but then right at the very end you get a feeling of he does want to see this woman again and feels sorrow about that. This stanza, as with in all the following stanzas, has this very interesting rhyme scheme going on, with alternate rhyme, but with that rhyming couplet towards the end. Some people have suggested this adds quite an uncomfortable bounce to the poem, that it seems out of whack with a poem that should be about sorrow, but I'm not sure how I feel about that. What I would draw your attention to is the para rhyme with dawn and gone, that her going, her being gone, seems to damage the rhyme scheme that is put into place. So night rhymes with quite, dawn should rhyme with gone, and the fact that it doesn't, that it's a para rhyme, I could argue that that's meaning that her going has disrupted the order of the world in some way. I think the second stanza carries on very much the tone and the atmosphere of the first, that Hardy is feeling sorrow that Emma Hardy has gone and he'll never hear from her again. What's slightly more interesting, though, is if you focus towards the end of this stanza, and that we recognise that the going of the title has now become the great going, that there is something very significant about the death of Emma Hardy, and indeed that final line, and altered all, that the entire world for this poet has been transformed by the death of the wife. And again, we may feel that that is something that we feel sympathy for, that Hardy is articulating here a genuine sorrow at the death of his wife. But then the third stanza returns to this interrogative: why do you make me leave the house? The sorrow that seemed to have been articulated in the second stanza is replaced by almost an anger, that Hardy is feeling haunted by Emma. And obviously the poem that this most closely resembles would be The Voice. I would see the third stanza here as being a version of that poem, The Voice. And as this poem develops, we get into the very interesting couplet that appears towards the end of this stanza: till in darkening dankness the yawning blankness of the perspective sickens me. The alliteration there and the assonance seems to generate a huge amount of anger and concern and unhappiness in the poet. He is missing her, and it is leaving a yawning blankness in his life, that there is something there that needs to be filled, and it is empty, and that is sickening him. Now, I do worry about that word sickening, because it seems to be suggesting that actually what Hardy is feeling most unhappy about is the gap that is in his life, that he is sickened by the yawning blankness where she used to be, rather than missing her for herself. And it may want to question here whether Hardy is sad that Emma Hardy has died, or Hardy is sad that he is alone. And I would argue they are probably two very different things. And then, interestingly, in the fourth stanza, we move to another tonal shift, that rather than the sadness or the bitterness that we've seen before, we get a very nostalgic quality appearing, when Hardy seems to think back to the times in their youth when they would be riding on top of Beanie Cliff. Now, Beanie Cliff isn't one of our named poems that we have to study for the examination, but I would encourage you to look at it, because it does again demonstrate this love that he felt for Emma Hardy earlier on in the relationship. And I think the connection that he makes between Emma Hardy and nature, between Emma and his beloved Wessex, is very important. She is the one with the swan neck who rides in the red-veined rocks. Very interesting connection between her beauty and the beauty of the world. And we get real nostalgia here, that reigning nigh me would muse and eye me. And I would again point you towards Neutral Tones there, where at the end of that relationship in Neutral Tones, the woman isn't really looking at the man anymore. So the fact that Hardy is looking back to a time when Emma would look at him and muse and eye him, seems to be the best of times. And indeed, that final line, while life unrolled us its very best, huge nostalgia there for the best of all times in their relationship. And again, look at the very hard rhymes here. So rather than the sight rhymes and the para rhymes of that first stanza, where Hardy was obviously disturbed by the death of his wife, we now see very solid abode, road, west, crest, best, me, very strong. And of course the me, do look at the egoism that there is being displayed here. And the fifth stanza develops on from that nostalgia to arguably becoming quite mawkish, that he has the moment of happiness that he remembers from their previous relationship, and then we return to the interrogative why, and the focus seems to be on what went wrong. Why did we not speak? Why did we not go back to where we were happy? Why did we not take the opportunity to enjoy our relationship? And there are a series of questions here, and there's a series of regrets that are articulated that I think sums up the whole reason for the Emma poems, that Hardy realises that actually there was something good in his life and he didn't take advantage of it. But again, we must not overlook the fact that he was married to this woman for 38 years, and there is something quite hollow about saying, why didn't we have such a good time, when he made no opportunity during his life to try to take advantage of this. This seems to me to be at the heart of it, that there is regret and there is wasted opportunity here. And that brings us to the final stanza, where quite clearly there is a huge volume of emotion being articulated by the poet. If we just look at the use of the ellipses, if we look at the very short sentences, the sort of breakdown of any fluidity to this poem, clearly Hardy is being affected by it. He is a dead man held on end to sink down soon. He's a dead man walking, and I think that's a beautiful image to express how he feels. He is someone that is waiting to sink now that he's had his prop removed from him. I would focus very much on that final bit of line, that no soul foreseeing, not even I, would undo me so. That he is articulating he is surprised. He would not have expected to feel so moved by the death of his wife, which again I think we would probably argue doesn't suggest they had the greatest relationship. But the fact that he's saying that he has been completely undone, that his very soul has been broken by the death of Emma, is very, very, very powerful. But the fragmentary quality is overall the most significant part of this stanza. So I hope that has been a useful revision exercise for you, just talking over the key issues that appear in this poem, and I leave you with a stride grid with some thoughts for you to consider later on in your revision. If you need to copy any notes down from here, I suggest you pause this video now.